Welcome back to the show. Well, we're now in the studios of the European Council, where for 2 days the heads of state of the 28 EU countries gathered to discuss a range of topics, from relations with Russia to migration and, of course, the trade deal with Canada, CETA. That has been negotiated since 2009 and was more or less agreed back in 2014, but is still not signed or sealed. To tell us more, we are joined now by Italy's Minister for Europe, Mr. Sandro Gozi. You're, of course, with the Democratic Party, the socialist group in the Italian government. And on the other side, we have co-chair of the Green Party in the European Parliament, Belgian MEP, Mr. Philippe Lamberts. Thank you both for being with me.
Thank you.
Mr. Lamberts, perhaps as the Belgian, I can start with your good self, because what we saw was not even one country, but one region of one country able to stall these international trade talks that had, concerned 535 million people, and 3.5 million people, it ended up in their hands.
Sure, but that's the way Europe decided to function, that such trade agreements would be decided, such mixed agreements, because this is not just a trade agreement, should be adopted by, not just by the European institutions, that is the Parliament and Council, but also by the parliaments of the member states. And in Belgium, our constitution says that for international treaties, well, even the regional parliaments have to vote. That's life. So you may not like it, but that's what it is. I would rather have it decided at European level purely, but then we have to change the procedure completely. I mean, the mandate has to be approved as a legislative act and not in secret meetings with the mandate. Actually, for CETA, the mandate was only revealed a year after the conclusions of the treaty. That speaks volumes, right, about transparency.
Has to be more transparent.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so now there are fundamental objections made by the Walloon Parliament, and believe me, they've studied the thing in and out, more, I would say, than any parliament in Europe. And if they found objections, it's probably because there are problems.
Good reason.
Now, they are raising the problems, let's address them.
And let's look at those problems in just a few minutes. But I would like to get Mr. Gozi's opinion on this signing off, making it a mixed agreement, which means you have to get the 28 countries able to sign off on the agreement. Italy was the only country that wrote to the EU institutions saying, for us, this is a trade agreement under EU institution competence. Did the Commission make a mistake by making it a mixed agreement and opening it up to this range of validations?
Yes, it did. It is clear that it did, because it is perfectly falling within the exclusive competencies of the European Union. It is an exclusive competence of the Union to negotiate trade and this kind of trade. We officially and formally ask to the European Commission to go ahead with this exclusive competence, not because we do not trust national institutions, of course. I'm a member of a national government, but because we trust European institutions and we trust the European Parliament.
And the question of transparency?
But the issue of transparency, there were very long consultation done by the European Commission during all the process. The agreement has been ready and could be examined as well as from the European Parliament. So we do not think why the European Union renounce to itself. And it is clear that it is, if this, we go along this way, it is the end of the trade policy, and it's the end also of the European institutions.
Mr. Gozi, I would just say one thing. Stick then to trade policy. If they had said, okay, we will stick to just trade issues, I would be perfectly in line with you, Mr. Gozi. But this is not the case. And when the issue of investor protection, these arbitration courts, has been raised consistently, instead of saying, okay, if this is a problem, then we move it aside and we stick to trade, they said, no, we want this. And so you feel by their resistance, by the resistance of the supporters of this deal, that this is not a trade deal. Actually, what they want is to curb the possibilities for legislatures to adopt legislation. And this is why we fight it.
Mr. Gozi, because I'm very curious about this investor dispute mechanism, because indeed a lot of governments, even the socialists in Germany, were worried about how much power multinational companies would be given in this special court system compared to national governments. They were giving a binding explanation to show the limits of that in the text. What exactly is left?
It has been discussed at length at the trade ministers meeting in Luxembourg on Monday.
National governments have retained the power?
Have raised. They maintain the power. This is a mechanism which is regularly used to solve trade disputes, but this point is not this. The point that we are blocking one of the trade agreements which should be taken as a model for the European Union because it preserves our interests, it preserves our model, it ensures environment protection, it ensures consumer protection, it ensures information right of European citizens. So this is economically is a great step ahead for small and medium enterprises because let me say a thing, for multinationals do not need trade agreement. Multinationals have such a power that should be regulated that goes well beyond a trade agreement. Those who will benefit the most for the trade agreement are small and medium enterprises.
And of course, a lot of critics say quite the opposite.
This is really cheap talk because who asked for these treaties? Business Europe and the chambers of commerce, who represent primarily major companies and not SMEs. And by the way, even in Wallonia, the SME representatives say we don't want this treaty. We don't want it because, well, basically it doesn't suit our needs. The real thing is that, again, what the multinationals want is to curb the possibility for legislatures to legislate. And the arbitration courts are a way to intimidate. And so you can say that it has been around for decades. I agree with you. Asbestos has been with us for a century before we decided, well, asbestos kills, so we will stop with it. So the argument that we always did like that is just nothing. And let me finish because no one has been able to answer the one question. Why do we need special courts between two jurisdictions where you have rule of law between Canada and the 28 member states? Why do we need extra tribunals? And no one has the answer. You say, well, it's been improved. That's not the question. If I don't need a car, let it be blue, white, or whatever. If I walk, I don't need the car. And in this case, we don't need these things.
I really cannot see why national institutions can be intimidated by an arbitration clause in a trade agreement. Our institutions are strong enough not to be intimidated by anything. And this agreement ensures that there is a full respect of the rules for environment, for consumer protection, both in Canada and the European Union.
It really protects the company.
But the point is, do we want to favor our export? Do we want to favor the trade with important partners? Do we want to use this agreement as a model for other agreements which are much more could be much more imbalanced or not?
And what's the price to pay? Mr. Gozi says we need to export. Now, just a detail. Our meat markets in Europe are in overproduction since decades. And now what would the CETA bring? 50,000 tons of beef and 70,000 tons of pork additional from Canada in Europe, in a market that is overcrowded. Tell me how that resonates with the agricultural sector.
Our export would benefit, if you take an example of our agreement, take the agreement we struck with Southern Korea. Our exporting goods have increased by 50%, 55%. Our exporting services are increasing 40%. It is clear that when you open a market, you give the consumer the right to choose, and it is clear that you cannot think of trading only on things that you want to export and not on things that you accept.
So basically what Mr. Gozi is saying is that we should pay any price just to be able to export more, and that means that some will lose, but we are not speaking about the losers of this deal, of course. And again, let's look at it from a COP21 perspective.
On the environment.
Our ecological footprint is already bigger than what the Earth can support. So actually, increasing the volume of international trade goes completely against the idea of reducing our ecological footprint.
It is, once again, also on environment. There is a very strong policy convergence between us and the Canadians.
But that's not the point. They are extracting tar sands.
It is really simple. I mean, beyond all this world, what we are saying that Europe should stop to promote its trade policy.
No,
so let's say it. Let's say that we don't want agreement with the rest of the world.
Just one example.
Let's say that even when we preserve our standard, as in CETA,
that's not the point.
We don't want to sign agreement. So let's be frank. Otherwise,
Mr. Gozi,
you are hiding yourself behind your
I'm not hiding at all. I mean, I worked in a multinational for 22 years. I'm not hiding. I know how business is going.
But
just
the question
protecting our standards.
How can the EU be credible if it doesn't sign CETA? If we show that after 9 years of talks, the EU
because the talks have produced something that goes contrary to the general interest. I mean, about our standards. We conceded to Canada even before concluding the CETA, the fact that we would not consider the tar sands, the oil extracted from the tar sands in Canada, which is probably the most awful fossil fuel, we would not consider it as a polluting fuel. So that was a gesture of goodwill towards Canada, which apparently would have the same standards as we are. Come on.
Let's move on to another hot topic, because CETA still has months and months to go before it will be finally ratified by Parliament.
For good news.
And we'll see what will happen in the future.
We're not discouraged.
We
continue to wait for good news.
Hope there from Italy. But however, we did also have another topic on the table at this EU Council. It was the EU's relation with Russia, notably due to the happenings, the awful atrocities in Aleppo in Syria. A number of countries had pushed for the word sanctions to be put on the table, for the EU to look at increasing sanctions on Russia. Italy got rid of that word in the final conclusions.
Sure.
Why?
With Russia, we have to promote a dual approach. We have to be very firm and very determined in ensuring the implementation of Minsk agreement, and they are not satisfactory at all. We don't see any real usefulness at this stage in waiving the issue of sanction against Russia on the Syrian issue. It doesn't help. Because it doesn't help, because it wouldn't change anything, because it wouldn't it wouldn't absolutely change the strategy of Russia, would only complicate an already very complicated and thorny dialogue with Russia in the Middle East. The issue of sanctions with Russia, it is there, it is linked to Ukraine, it is linked to the Minsk agreement. We will discuss about the rollover in January. In the issue of Syria, it simply doesn't help and would further complicate issues. And none of the other international partners, which are very involved in the Syrian issue, are asking to go this way. So there must be a reason.
France and Germany seemed like they wanted to put that in the UK.
Again, this is cheap talk, because, well, I agree with you, Mr. Gozi. We should really have two channels with Russia. But what you say, we should only have one. We should talk and talk and talk, and no sanctions. Sorry, I heard the socialist group yesterday in the Conference of Presidents, and I heard now the Italian government saying, well, you know, sanctions have failed, and so we should stop with sanctions against Russia. Why is that? I mean, we saw it with Berlusconi, we saw it now with Renzi. Italy is economically dependent from Russia, and so they want to protect their trade interests. They want to, and of course, this is in line with what we just discussed on CETA.
Italy is one of the biggest economies in the world. Yeah. It's the third economy of the Eurozone.
And you are dependent from Russia, and you just want to export at any price.
The second industry in the world and in Europe, and we do not depend by any country.
Oh, poor guy.
We don't depend by any country. No,
sure.
Because we are not poor guy. Because we are a big country with a big economy, and we certainly do not depend on the relation with this or the
I don't know who you are
Gozi,
convincing with this.
On the EU level, it does look like the EU is very weak on the Syria question. When you see it's John Kerry, it's the US Secretary of State that is meeting with the Russian counterpart in Geneva.
Yes.
EU isn't even present.
But is the EU really playing a role now in Russia, in Syria?
Yeah.
No, it's playing a role in Ukraine. And do you think that waiving the threat of useless sanction in this stage on Syria, that would allow the European Union to play a role? I mean,
what should my question is, what should the EU do? Because it looks from the outside that now we're taking a back seat on a crucial, awful issue. What should the EU be doing?
But the EU is anywhere in the Syria's issue, and wouldn't get a role doing something which nobody asks, and certainly doesn't help on the issue that we are discussing. So, I mean, you can ask me the question 10 times, but if you say that the EU must play a role, waiving the possibility of sanctions.
No, I'm not saying necessarily sanctions,
but we are discussing about this.
What is all leverage? What I know is that a number of EU member states are bombing in Syria and in Iraq. That's fact. That's fact. So that's our only contribution to the conflict. We are bombing. Now, the next thing is when I hear Mr. Gozi saying we should not use useless sanctions. I would agree. Who wants to use something that is useless? But are sanctions useless? That's the question. Look at the Iran case. Indeed, there was a very tough sanction regime against Iran for a very long time, and ultimately we got an agreement on their nuclear program.
There was
there was pressure.
But there was a general agreement of the international community on this proposal. There isn't agreement of anybody because at this stage, in very difficult passage,
I agree.
nobody is asking
easy.
for this. So I follow you. You are absolutely right. On Iran, works perfectly because the international community agreed.
And do you believe that
this
Mr.
is why
Putin
we have to build up a consensus of the key international actor in the Middle East and in Syria before taking this kind of decision.
But do you think,
and at this stage, there isn't this consensus.
Do you
exactly
think, I
on the
agree with
Iranian
you.
model
I agree with you, Mr. Gozi, but do you think that Mr. Putin reacts to just talk? This guy embodies the tradition of Russia of creating tension. And he will react to pressure. And if you say, okay, we refrain from applying pressure, you are making the European Union looking stupid.
This is exactly the reason why we agreed on sanctions against Russia on the Ukrainian case. Because there is a general agreement, and there we are not satisfied on the implementation of the Minsk agreement, but we have to stick to that line.
Well, we're running out of time, but one quick question on the migration issue, which is largely a fallout of the Syrian conflict. And now for Italy, it's more coming from African countries, 144,000 people so far this year. Migration was on the agenda here at this council, but once again, it doesn't seem like there's any new proposals or new actions coming into place.
Yeah, it depends on the benchmark you use. The words are better compared to Bratislava, which was a total disaster, a securitarian approach. There wasn't even mentioned the name Africa, so I mean, it was really a disaster from this perspective. This time, this council, in words, is taking a step ahead. Africa is a big priority. The development plan for new investment in Africa to build up a new dialogue on an equal footing between European and Africans to manage migration and to tackle the root cause of migration. It's there. The responsibility for return policy is clearly indicated as one of the activities of the European police, border police. Now we want to see if this time European Union shift from words to actions.
We're sadly out of time in that show, but indeed we will be keeping a close eye on those words to see what they transform into. Thanks very much to both my guests for having joined us. Thanks also, of course, to you at home for having watched. That brings us to the end of this edition of Talking Europe.